The archdeacon snapped the wax seal and read names aloud. Edda of Vire is forbidden to return. Suspicion tightened the chronicler's jaw as the crowd shifted. He stepped forward and demanded the decree be shown. His suspicion hardened into a sharp demand when the robed road warden reached for the scroll and said, "Records are not for lay eyes." Within 5 sentences the problem was clear. Some pilgrims would be forced to continue the road forever, and the chronicler's notebooks might be seized for asking why. He had come to the cathedral as an observer. He arrived with a satchel of manuscripts and a brass watch wound for patience. The chronicler moved through the forecourt, counting details with quick fingers. Rain on wool, the dull ring of iron on gate, the archdeacon's breath fogging above the parchment. He had studied pilgrim badges and registry forms for years. He catalogued marginalia the way others counted coins. That work had trained his eye to spot procedure, not piety, and procedure told him this was not an accidental decree. The crowd smelled of wet leather and candle smoke. A woman near the gate slapped a child's hand away and mouthed a name. A man muttered, "They cannot take her home," and the chronicler heard the syllables as if they might be evidence. He pressed his palm to his ink, stained fingertips, and kept them steady. He did not think in abstractions. He thought in paper, stamp, and signature. Suspicion moved him from watching to acting. He stepped up to the archdeacon and spoke plainly. "Show the decree." The archdeacon held the parchment at arm's length. The chronicler, the archdeacon without looking, "This is an ecclesiastical pronouncement. Leave its true reading to us." The chronicler, "You read names in public and deny inspection in private. Tell me why Edda cannot go home." The archdeacon's mouth tightened. He did not answer with doctrine. He raised his hand toward the road warden and said, "Enforce the prohibition." "No one touches the lists." The road warden moved like a machine in a robe, steps measured, hand at a leather satchel of seals. Edda did not speak from the crowd. Her hood covered most of her face. Only a pale cheek showed. The chronicler watched her fingers curl around a pilgrim's badge. He had seen badges before, metal discs stamped at way stations and churches, but this one had a tiny fold of parchment stitched to leather, written in cramped script. That fold was a small concrete thing and, as such, worth more than 1,000 sermons. After the proclamation, the congregation dispersed in pushed knots. The chronicler kept his coat buttoned and followed the shorter routes to the hostel, where pilgrims shook wet capes and asked soft questions. He went to the hostel not to rest but to find the badge. He had learned that institutions hide intent in receipts and in worn edges. At the hostel, matron paused by the kettle and watched him with narrowed eyes. "Matron, I need to see Edda's badge," she answered. "Why should I give it to you?" "You ask for trouble," he replied, "because names recorded this way can become orders." Her hesitation lasted a single breath. They talked in a cluttered common room, where benches smelled of stew and straw. Edda sat with her hands lodged under her cloak, jaw working. The chronicler put a lamp between them so the script would be legible. He did not speak about feelings. He counted lines and presses. He pointed to a margin note sewn into the badge and said, "This reads like an entry, not a prayer." Edda's face changed. Her knuckles whitened. She looked at the hostel matron and whispered, "They me this was penance. They me I must stay on the road until the sigil wears away." The chronicler tapped his pencil against his thumb and made a small notation. Edda's talk had the force of a report. She, the matron, "Once your name bears the stamp, you are bound." They called it a forfeiture. The matron added, "We have seen it before, names marked for the road. People vanish from home ledgers after the stamp." The chronicler, "Who stamps them?" The matron answered, "Not us. The cathedral sends a rider. The road warden keeps the list." The chronicler made another note with quick, small strokes. He could not accept hearsay alone. That night he waited until the hostel's hearth burned low. He watched the matron lock the chest with iron talk, and then saw the matron push him a corner where she kept a stack of worn papers. She moved like a woman used to bending rules slightly for the right account. He, "Are you certain, matron?" She, "Certain enough to risk your collar for the truth." He, "I will accept the risk." She slid a small receipt across the table. The receipt was damp but clear. It carried a crimson round stamp and a line that read like a contract. The chronicler read aloud the formal phrase and paused at the signature that matched the archdeacon's hand. He felt anger rise in his chest, first a tight irritation, then a heated quickness in his fingers. He tapped the ink with the tip of his pencil until the motion steadied him. He whispered to the matron, "This is institutional. It is not a punishment of conscience. It is a binding," she nodded and said. "It sends people into exile without a return date." He closed his hand around the receipt as if to keep the ink from blowing away. 2 nights later he crept to the cathedral records chamber. He had learned the route. A servant's entrance, a loose stone under the 3rd buttress, a rope ladder to a narrow slit window. He moved with the careful confidence of someone who has broken into places to read the truth before. He used his pocket watch to time the hours between bell strokes. When he slipped through the archives door, he smelled dust and iron. Rows of ledgers sat like anchored fish, their spines scored by fingernails. He worked quickly by candlelight. He did not think of endurance. He thought of names. He ran a finger down columns until his wrist ached. Then he found a book bound in rough brown leather with a crimson impression on the cover. He opened it. Names filled the page in a small, deliberate hand. The chronicler read aloud in a voice near the candle. "Giles of Rouen, sealed. Martyr of Tours, sealed." His voice stopped at a name so familiar that his tongue missed the syllables. "Alastair Marchand, sealed," he read. And his own last name sat there with the same crimson sigil pressed next to it. His reaction was a physical thing. His knee hit the floor and the candle pitched light across the page. His breath left him in a single exhale that tasted of metal. Alarm took his mouth. He said, "This is my name." Nothing about that sentence was metaphor. He felt heat in the scar at his temple where a memory surface burned years ago. His fingers went cold against the book. He flipped pages and found his name repeated, each entry a different date, every one stamped the same. Doubt became fear in the way his hands refused to hold the ledger steady. He heard footsteps outside the chamber before he could conceal the book. He slid the volume into his satchel and started for the window. The bolts clicked. Voices met in the corridor. The archdeacon and the road warden moved with low, efficient conversation. He froze behind a shelf and listened. The road warden, "We must move the bound pilgrims at dawn." "The list will be enforced," the archdeacon replied. "See that the chronicler's questions are discouraged. He has been noted." The chronicler's heart paced in his ears. His chest tightened with emotion that felt much like anger turning to raw resolve. When the corridor fell quiet, he climbed out and ran. He nearly missed a stone step and scraped his hand. Fresh blood dotted the ledger's leather in the satchel. He did not stop until the hostel's doorway opened and closed behind him. He met Ada at the ruined arch they had chosen as a meeting place. She saw the satchel and did not ask where he had gotten it. She asked, "Is it true?" He handed the book to her and said, "My name is here, Ada. They can bind anyone." Eda's eyes widened and fear tightened the back of her throat. If your name is on that list, you will not sleep at home again." "My cousin never came back." The words landed like a measured blow. They argued over the slow plan to expose the ledger. The hostel matron set cloth across the table and said, "You two must not act alone. The road warden watches for lone wolves." The chronicler answered, "We will not be lone, Ada. I can read the marginal codes. I have seen the little dots and lines on badges that mean route and return status." The matron added a short, direct line. "Then show the code to me. I will hide it if it proves what you say." Conversation tightened into strategy. Their voices came in short lines. Ada code, matron, the hiding place, chronicler, the ledger, each name anchored who would do what. They staged a small break, in 2 nights later at the monastery archive where the codex sat under 2 locks. The chronicler's hand trembled only once when he lifted the seal. The codex's first page bore a formal title and an index of rotes. Beneath that index, a stamped diagram showed way stations like nodes joined by lines. On the margin, someone had penciled instructions. Certain names were to be sealed in perpetuity, and a reference number pointed to a red, stamped receipt. The chronicler read the reference and felt a sudden, precise hatred for legal language. They copied pages in the dim room with shaking hands. Ada traced marginal lines and said, "This is not clerical error. This is a network of procedure. See here codes that mark permanent forfeiture." The matron nodded and slid the copies into a cloth lining of her shawl. A sudden noise startled them. A monk's heavy footsteps approached. They froze. The matron kissed Edda's forehead and mouthed a single line. "Hide it now." The chronicler held the codex and moved like a man who had rehearsed the rote a dozen times. At dawn, the chronicler planned to place a complaint with the archdeacon to force public acknowledgement. Edda argued against it, saying, "If you show the ledger, they will use the names you exposed to fill the next list." He countered, "If we do not show the ledger, it will be used without scrutiny." Their voices rose in quick lines. "The matron, you are arguing like two people who have already lost someone," the chronicler answered. "That is because we have lost many already. We keep count." The conversation tightened into decision. They would attempt one public confrontation to create witnesses, then bring copies of the codex to sympathetic way stations. They made the attempt at the cathedral forecourt at dusk. The chronicler stood before the archdeacon with the copied pages clutched in his hand and called out, "You bind people to road and law without appeal." The archdeacon: "Chronicler, you defame sacred order." The roadwarden stepped forward and said, "Step back, or you will be charged with false accusation." A crowd pressed tight. Edda held the matron's sleeve as if to steady herself. The chronicler set the copies on the rail and said, "Read this aloud, Archdeacon. Tell these people what sealed in perpetuity means." The archdeacon took one look and paled. The crowd's temperature changed when the archdeacon touched the copied page. He did not deny the code. "There are cases that require permanence." The chronicler shot back, "Who chooses permanence?" "You do. The roadwarden enforces it." The roadwarden answered in clipped lines. "We enforce orders passed to our office." The exchange turned into a rapid back and forth for 5 lines. Archdeacon: "Who signs?" "I do when the matter is resolved." "Resolved by whom?" "By council and necessity." "Who decides necessity?" "The council." "Who sits on the council?" The last question hung in the courtyard as a specific demand for names and a specific attempt to make witnesses note the presence of the roadwarden when he moved the sealed pilgrims. The archdeacon ordered the bells rung. The bell's strokes served as both signal and machinery. Pilgrims rose and formed in lines. The roadwarden called names, and several people, already marked, were pushed forward and marshaled into a procession. The chronicler moved to block the line, and the roadwarden grabbed his arm. The chronicler: "You touch me and I will name you in the ledger." The roadwarden tightened his grip and pulled him away. Edda cried out a name to stop a man who tried to step forward, and the matron shoved through the press to grab a young pilgrim by the sleeve. The procession left the forecourt in a drip of dull sound: boots on wet stone, the scrape of pack, the faint rattle of badge metal. The chronicler watched them go, counting names whispered, a list forming in his head. He had been forced into the role he had avoided. Not a mere recorder, but a participant. He felt the shifts inside him, suspicion at first, then a surge of alarm when his name appeared, then a cold calculation: to publish, to leak, to spare at least some homes. He and his allies moved to execute a plan. Copies to way stations, a small pamphlet slipped into travelers' packs, and a promised meeting under the ruined arch at dawn. They met under the arch, breath visible in the early light. Edda held a thin strip of parchment with a marginal code she had copied from a badge. She traced the line with a stained fingertip and said, "This marks those who may not return." The pattern repeats across counties. The matron: "If we expose it at enough way stations, people will have copies and families can object." The chronicler opened his satchel and tapped the ledger's edge where his name lay. "I will not run from this. If my name binds me, I will use that binding to reveal the process." Edda looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. They had one more discovery before the chapter closed. The codex contained a notation in a hand different from the clerk's, small, hurried script in a margin that referenced an older ritual. A stamped phrase that connected the seals with a vow taken at way stations. The chronicler traced the phrase and felt something alter in his understanding. This was not only administrative. It had been grafted onto ritual language to give the binding a visible sacredness. He realized the twist. What had looked like a cold legal system had been wrapped in ceremony, so it would be obeyed without question. They could do more damage with that discovery. It changed their strategy. The matron whispered, "Ceremony makes people accept it. Break the ceremony and you break consent, Edda. Then we must show the ceremony as paperwork, not sacrament." The chronicler closed the codex and slid a copied page into his coat. He kept his voice level and said, "We leave at dusk to plant copies at three-way stations. We will let the road keep marching, but we will cut the strings that hold it." The matron put a hand on his sleeve and said, "Be careful with your name." Alastair, he nodded and pocketed the crimson, stamped receipt. They parted with rolls assigned and a plan that felt like a rope stretched across the road. The chronicler walked back to the ruined arch alone, sat down on a crumbling step, and paused to breathe the air heavy with wet stone. He did not brood. He checked his satchel, counted the papers, and rewound his watch. He felt resolve settle into precise motions, folding, sealing, tucking, rather than into grand pronouncements. The day had delivered concrete shifts. Public exposure, a found ledger with his name, alliance with two others who would not leave him alone. Before he left the monastery archive, he made one final move. He opened the ledger briefly, smoothed a corner, and slid a thin receipt between the pages with his own quick script added in a margin. A note of discovery and a reference to a hidden column the road warden used for enforcement. He closed the book and replaced it where he had found it. Then he took the codex copy and the receipt and walked away as the first bell began its slow, rolling stroke. He reached the hostel and heard the matron whisper from a doorway, "We will meet again," he answered with a single, concrete promise. At the ruined arch, tomorrow at dawn, he locked his satchel, and a firm knock sounded on the archive door behind him. The knock broke all planning into immediate action. The chapter ends on that sound. A new arrival at the archive, a door not yet opened, and the chronicler's hand closing over the copy of the codex as he rose. A road warden drew the sealed parchment from the ferryman's hands and said sharply, "She may not cross." Suspicion tightened the chronicler's jaw as water dragged small stones toward the ferry's ropes. He leaned forward on the ramp, ink-stained fingers resting against the leather of his satchel, and watched Edda of Vire step back while the gathering pilgrims pressed closer. The problem was concrete. A written order barred her return to Vire, and those words carried both legal force and a mark that smelled faintly of wax and incense. The chronicler's suspicion pushed him toward the crowd. He would not let an official act go unexamined. He moved with the patience of a man who catalogued marginalia for a living. He had been in places where seals meant only taxes and tithers. The wax on this parchment wore a crimson impression he had seen once before in the archdeacon's study when the seal snapped and the names were read aloud. That memory was fresh because he demanded the decree be shown then. He would demand it again now. He stepped between two pilgrims and squared his shoulders against the drizzle. Road warden, the chronicler, holding his voice low but exact, "Show me the order." The words as a clerk would read a line of law. The road warden did not hesitate. He unfolded the parchment where the seal had been broken and held it so the crowd could see the script. The ferryman's torchlight flashed across the wax and made the crimson sigil look like a bruise on the page. Edda's lips trembled. "I must go home," she said. Her hands clutched the strap of a damp satchel. "My mother is sick. I have coins. I have nothing left here." "Please." Thomas, a fellow pilgrim with a battered staff, stepped forward and placed his hand on Edda's shoulder. "You heard the order," the road warden replied. "No crossing. The writ bears the archbishop's mark." He tapped the wax with a finger. "It is not our whim." His voice meant enforcement. Pilgrims murmured. A child behind Thomas began to cry. The chronicler moved closer to read the script over the road warden's shoulder. The ink was formal, but the line stamped over Edda's name was not handwriting. It was a sigil pressed into the parchment with force and heat. "Thomas, this is wrong." "Thomas will not let them take her." He moved to grab the parchment. The road warden stepped back, palms flat. "Thomas, stay. You know the law." Thomas shook his head. "No, I know a woman when she needs help." "Edda, come with me." He reached for Edda's arm. The road warden's hand grazed the hilt at his hip. "Don't touch the writ," he warned. "Or you will learn what happens to those who dispute binding letters on the road." He spoke the last words with a practiced hardness. When Thomas tried to pull Edda toward the ferry, the chronicler quickly, "Stand down, Thomas. Let me see the order first." He pushed between them, fingers cold inside his coat pocket where his charcoal pencil steadied his grip. His suspicion had shifted. He now suspected the writ hid more than administrative cruelty. He had seen marginalia tied to rights before. He could not let a public removal happen without documentation. He angled his body to read the text aloud. The parchment read like law. It named Edda, gave her village, and ordered her removal from return rights. Then a stamped mark covered her name. The chronicler spelled it out. A consecrated sealing stamped over the subject's name. He felt a change in the crowd's tone. Curiosity turned toward a thin fear. Edda's breath made quick, small noises. A robed archivist appeared from the lane holding a lamp. He moved with the silent surety of men who worked among ledgers. This writ is proper, the archivist, and he set the lamp on the ferry ledger table. He did not lift his eyes to the chronicler immediately. Instead, he unrolled a second parchment and produced a small leather bag from beneath his robe. The chronicler archivist, may I inspect the seal? He kept his request measured. The archivist hesitated. Only a higher official may authorize inspection in the field. The chronicler met the archivist's gaze. I am recording this for the grimoire. The people here deserve to know the reasons. The archivist's fingers tightened on the leather bag. Then put your quill to paper and leave the document, he said. Thomas cursed softly and spat. This is a trick, he said. They will say the writ is sacred, and we will be helpless. He turned to Edda. Edda, stay with me. I will return with someone who will argue on your behalf. Edda's eyes found Thomas, and she nodded once, barely. The road warden motioned 2 guards forward. They were salted with road dirt and wore short cloaks. Their boots sank into the mud. They took Edda's pilgrim badge from her chest and snapped the cord free. The badge was a small scallop shell of beaten tin with worn engraving. One guard rolled it between thumb and forefinger, and the metal made a tired sound. The chronicler felt anger rise in him, not the abstract kind, but a concrete tightening in his jaw and a flaring at the base of his palms. His hands wanted to snatch the badge back. Instead, he recorded the exchange with clipped lines. Archivist, the seal has red wax and an impression I recognize. Is this the archdeacon's device? He named the archdeacon because he remembered the snapped seal, the reading of names, and the same crimson stain on parchment in the archdeacon's hands. The archivist's voice thinned. It bears the prelate's compound. There are clauses tied to consecrated procedure. It is. He stopped when a pilgrim shouted, We were not witches! The shout came from a woman with a blanket over her shoulders. The crowd rose and fell with murmurs of anger and fear. Outside the ferry's lee, the chronicler noticed the scribal table that served as a makeshift ledger. Someone had left a ledger open and a small weight had slipped. The edge of a page exposed dense marginalia written in a cramped hand. The chronicler's fingers moved the way a man who learned to steal glances from ledgers does. He reached and pulled a rubbing of the page with a scrap of waxed paper. He worked the charcoal across it, making the sigil and the certificate's letters smudge onto the paper. The rubbing lifted the hidden mark into his palm. He read the marginalia silently. Procedural clauses, liturgical references, and an instruction that certain consecrated oaths required public removal from the protection of the host community. The words named a ritual act that transformed ordinary penance into sustained exile. The chronicler's breath shortened. The crowd heard nothing of his discovery, but his suspicion changed again. Doubt, mounting fear. He had suspected legal abuse. Now he suspected deliberate ritual binding. What have you taken? The archivist demanded without moving his lamp. Only a rubbing. The chronicler. He kept his voice level because every drawn edge of tone could become an accusation. He flattened the paper so the press of the charcoal showed the sigil clearly. The archivist's eyes widened when he saw the impression. You should not. The archivist began, then shut his mouth. He took 2 steps forward and then restrained himself. Guards edged closer. Thomas muttered, They will say it is sacrament. They will break us for questioning. He sounded exasperated and frightened. The road warden's face set. The archdeacon will come to confirm this writ. He added, Hold her at the way station until then. He pointed toward a narrow lane where a low building with shuttered windows waited. The chronicler moved at once. He would follow. He would watch what the way station did to those stamped by that seal. Edda's badge, now torn and dulled, lay in a guard's palm. The guard folded it into a pocket. The chronicler felt the need to document that theft with his eyes. They marched Edda toward the way station with 2 guards between her and the crowd. Thomas shouted, You will not take her! And then was seized by one of the guards. Rough hands pinned his arms. He resisted. Let go of Thomas! Edda cried, "Thomas, help me." Thomas pulled free enough to bang his shoulder into a guard. The guard answered with the butt of his hand. Edda stumbled, and the chronicler saw the way her feet sank into the mud with each step. The chronicler kept close. He did not want to be arrested, but he did not want to be left behind either. At the way station doorway, a distracted scribe worked under a lamp, his face streaked with ink. He cursed softly as a quill snapped. The chronicler slipped into the scriptorium and watched the scribe shift through ledgers. The scribe left a ledger open while he fetched a new ink pot. The chronicler leaned and took another rubbing, careful not to breathe on the page. The marginalia here were more explicit. A clause that tied the sealed writ to an oath sworn at a consecrated font, and an instruction that the subject's badge be removed and destroyed before the shield of sanctuary could be restored. The chronicler felt a jolt of clarity. This was not merely punishment. It was a formal mechanism designed to keep a person away indefinitely. From the doorway came the archdeacon's voice. "Bring the woman to the chapel courtyard. We will pronounce the binding." The chronicler lifted his head and saw the archdeacon move beneath the carved relief, flanked by clerics. He recognized the man from the earlier reading of names. The archdeacon's presence hardened the moment. The chronicler stepped out and confronted the archdeacon beneath the relief. He held up the rubbing with both hands so the carved saint and the inked sigil shared a frame. "Archdeacon, this marginalia speaks of ritual binding. What law makes exile an eternal penance?" His voice had a measured edge. The archdeacon glanced down at the rubbing, then at Edda, then at the road warden. "This is sacred procedure," he said. "It is the church's prudence to protect the pilgrimage and the host. Remove her from communal protections, and she will answer her penance where she must." He lowered his gaze and added, "Stand down, chronicler. Your questions are impertinent in this holy process." He did not meet the chronicler's eyes. Thomas pushed at a guard. "You cannot hide behind God and take people's homes," he said. His words were rapid. He raised his voice, "Archdeacon, Edda has coins and family. You cannot." The archdeacon's attendant stepped forward and set a hand on Thomas' chest. "Thomas, stop," the chronicler sharply, placing a palm on Thomas' sleeve. "Let me speak." He kept Thomas from striking further. Thomas bent his head and breathed, the tightness in his shoulders visible. The chronicler's suspicion had become anger. The anger made him press the rubbing toward the archdeacon's face. "Look at the stamp." The chronicler. "It is set over her name as if to bind her by consecrated right. That is beyond civic writ. You are using liturgy to seal exile." The archdeacon's mouth tightened. "You accuse the church of ritual cruelty." He said, his tone hard. "I accuse you of using ritual to alter legal protection." The chronicler replied, "The ledger calls it a procedure. The scribe's note speaks of destroying the badge and of an oath sworn by a road warden. These are actions, not prayers. They remove a person's right to return." The archdeacon's hands curled. You will be held if you attempt to seize the record." Two guards moved forward toward the chronicler, shadow stepping into noon. A sudden hush fell over the courtyard. Edda stood with her hands bound at her sides. Her lips were white against the cold. She nothing. The archdeacon lifted his fingers and began a litany that sounded like law. His voice held authority. The road warden looked at the guards for confirmation. One guard lifted Edda's badge between thumb and forefinger and snapped it with a small, decisive motion. The metal broke, and the sound made a thin ringing in the air. The chronicler stepped between the archdeacon and the guards. "I will not allow a private ritual to become a civic sentence without record," he said. His voice had the cadence of a man who catalogued evidence. "You must show the higher authorization. If this is lawful, let it be recorded openly. If not, release her." The archdeacon's attendant signaled the guards. The chronicler saw the line in their eyes that meant arrest. "Then you force our hand." The archdeacon. He turned toward the road warden and nodded once. "Take him if he resists." Two guards advanced. Thomas stepped forward to help the chronicler and was grabbed. A scuffle began, short and savage. The chronicler fought with the precision of a man who had to protect his hands for writing. He felt the scrape of linen and the rough catch of a palm on his coat. The archdeacon lifted his voice and pronounced the binding over Edda in words the chronicler could not fully pass, but that ended with a formal stamping motion. The chronicler felt a cold clarity as the archdeacon's men dragged Thomas away and Edda was led off beneath the carved relief. The courtyard's tension broke into action and then a retreat. The chronicler's anger shifted again. He moved from anger into calculated resolve. He gathered the rubbing and the torn corner of Edda's badge he had pocketed earlier and retreated to the shadowed alley behind the way station. Thomas whispered through bruised lips as the chronicler crouched beside him. "They will say you stole the document. Thomas, they will say you are a meddler." He spat blood from his lip. The chronicler checked Thomas' shoulder for a split skin and tore a strip from his own sleeve to bind the wound. He worked quickly and spoke in short sentences. "We will not leave this. We will take this to a higher court if they will not answer." Thomas laughed once, a hard bark. "A higher court, they are allied. The archdeacon has the prelate's ear. They bind with right and right." Thomas' voice wavered. "Then we will force the record into light." The chronicler. He secured the rubbing in his grimoire and wrapped the badge fragment in cloth. He made a small, deliberate note on a scrap of paper and tucked it where he could feel it against his ribs. The chronicler felt the shift inside him from suspicion to resolve. His fingers tightened on his pencil as if to anchor his plan. Night fell and the group moved to a safe room. The chronicler worked by lamplight, rubbing the sigil again into his grimoire and cataloguing the ledger lines. The scribe's handwriting matched a clerical hand known in records as the archdeacon's scriptorium style. The chronicler wrote brief, factual entries. Who spoke, who moved, what was taken, the exact phrasing in the writ. He did not allow himself long notes on feeling. He wrote actions, and he wrote them plainly. In the middle of the night a knock sounded at his door. He froze, pencil poised. The knock came again, insistent but not frantic. He counted the beats. 2 slow, 1 quick. He put the grimoire under his arm and opened the door a crack. On the threshold stood a woman he had seen at the ferry, the one who had shouted earlier. Her blanket was folded over her arm and her face held lines he now recognized: fear, exhaustion, and a thin, deliberate courage. The archdeacon withdrew under clerical protection, she said without preamble. They took Edda to the chapel and closed its gates. They will process her at dawn. Her voice had the short, sharp tone of someone who had traveled a distance that made her practical. She pressed a folded scrap into the chronicler's hand. It was a small list of names and 2 times. A market day at the next town and a notary who would meet at dusk. Thomas will be held in the guardhouse. We can try the notary. We can try the market to raise witnesses. She paused. Do you have the rubbing? The chronicler showed the grimoire's edge. He placed a small, tangible object, the badge fragment, into her hand. Keep this safe, he said. If they destroy every badge, this proves the sequence. Take Thomas' name to the notary. Tell him precisely what happened at the ferry. We will gather evidence to force a public hearing. The woman nodded. They made plans that night in short, direct sentences. The chronicler measured every step. Whose testimony to call, which cleric might be sympathetic, which market vendors had seen Edda in the morning light. The mood shifted in the group from raw outrage to organized purpose. The chronicler's suspicion gave rise to method. Method moved into strategy. Before dawn the chronicler sat by his small window and traced the rim of his watch with a thumb. He wrote the day's plan in the margin of the grimoire. Meet the notary at dusk, gather statements at market, petition the regional court. He did not let himself imagine the outcome. He catalogued actions and set times. He tied the chapter closed with a concrete vow recorded in ink and a date. As he snapped the grimoire shut, he felt the ache in his wrist where a guard had grabbed him. He slipped Edda's torn badge fragment into a small pocket of the satchel. The final beat of the chapter was not a reflection but a sound. A knock at the door, measured and deliberate. The chronicler laid his hand on the latch and prepared to answer. The chapter ends with that knock, an arrival that promises a new line of action and a further challenge to the archdeacon's writ. Emotion root. Suspicion. Emotion shifts, suspicion mounting, fear, anger, resolve. The chapter's small conflict, the public removal and the exposure of a consecrated seal, was resolved in this episode by documentation, witness gathering, and a concrete plan to force higher adjudication. The chronicler does not yet win Edda's return, but he converts suspicion into a record and a sequence of actions that will test the writ's claimed sanctity. The last physical event, the knock, lands as a prompt for the next chapter's immediate choices. The robed official pressed a crimson sigil into Edda of Vire's pilgrim badge. The stamp left a hot, smelling iron taste on the air, and the crowd stepped back. Suspicion tightened the chronicler's jaw. He moved forward with his ink, stained fingers hooked at his satchel, spectacles balanced low on his nose, and watched the sigil sink into the leather. The crowd did not murmur. The badge bleached a small, blackened circle where brass had met leather. He had heard the word forbidden before. He had heard the archdeacon snap wax and read names aloud in the market square 2 days earlier. That memory traveled with him as a practical fact, the sound of the seal, the name Edda of Vire. The chronicler did not think in abstractions. He catalogued details. The tassel on Edda's cloak, the exact distance of the road warden's left foot from the shrine, the way the robed official's sleeve was crimson at the cuff. Those measurements guided him now. Step back, the robed official ordered, voice flat and precise. Edda tried to pull the badge free. Her hand trembled. I must return to my sister, she said. The chronicler heard the crack behind her sentence, an intake of breath from the crowd, leather on stone. He felt suspicion turn into something harder when the road warden tilted the sealed parchment so the sun could not read the script. Show me the cause. Show me the written order, the road warden. You are not a party to this. His hand moved toward the scroll. He spoke as if the motion itself were an argument. The chronicler stepped closer. Hands came up. A young pilgrim beside Edda hissed. Stay back, chronicler. This will end badly. The chronicler's reply was not a speech. He reached, fingers grazing the leather of his satchel to steady the grimoire beneath. Road warden, he said, stating the name as if it were an instruction. I demand the parchment. His voice was low. There was no flourish. Speakers in the crowd tightened their faces. The road warden did not yield. He withdrew the parchment with one thumb and pinched the wax seal. His jaw worked. The archdeacon appeared on the shrine steps, the habit rustling like a banner. He walked with the same slow certainty that had allowed him to read names aloud in the market. The chronicler watched the archdeacon's left hand, the one that would press the signet, and the tension in his neck. The road warden made a small gesture. 2 of his men closed ranks. The chronicler inched forward and a hand closed on his satchel strap. Let him see it, someone in the crowd said. The archdeacon tapped the seal with a short rod and said, This is the ordinance. We follow the rite. Which ordinance? The chronicler demanded, by whose authority? He pressed the questions as if words were levers. Suspicion had become insistence. His fingers against the grimoire tightened. The archdeacon's mouth tightened. The road wardens enforced the rite. The chapter confirms. His eyes flicked to a scribe tucked against the pillar. The chronicler noticed the scribe's hand, ink streak. Quick. He also noticed how the scribe's gaze fell, almost involuntarily, toward the chronicler's satchel. When a scribe slid from the archdeacon's side and, under his robe, slipped a folio to the chronicler, no one in the crowd expected it. The hand that passed it was small and secretive. The chronicler caught the folio and stepped aside to a narrow scriptorium alcove beneath the cloister where light came through a slit window and struck the folio in a hard rectangle. He opened the folio with 2 rapid motions. His breath shortened in an automatic, bodily way. He felt it, not thought it. The page showed dense marginalia ledger lines, names stamped in small letters, and over a pilgrim's entry was a tiny stamped sigil the same crimson as the badge. A clause ran across the bottom in cramped script, a binding ordinance that did not read like punishment alone but like a contract. The binding invoked a patron and arranged perpetual passage and payment. Shock rose through him like a physical pressure behind his eyes. He slapped the folio closed and put a finger against his temple to steady the surge. The sensation stabbed, fingers went numb for a beat. The chronicler shoved the folio under his coat and returned to the shrine. Outside, the council convened in the chapter house. The archdeacon called the meeting terse. Voices split quickly between clerics who murmured fears of scandal and road wardens who insisted on the sanctity of the rite. The robed official, the one who had sealed Edda's badge, stood with shoulders squared. You read names aloud. The chronicler to the archdeacon, holding the folio like a verdict. You sealed the badge. Where did that clause originate? The archdeacon's hand hovered over the gilt edge of the chapter table. We follow custom, he said. The chapter interprets. He used the formal noun to shield personal detail. The road warden's voice cut in. Custom keeps the roads open. Laws keep pilgrims safe. He looked directly at Edda when he said the last word, as if the two ideas were the same. Edda had followed him into the chapter house, wrists blistered from the badge's strap. She clearly, I swore to balm a fevered child. I only took an extra night. I must see my sister now. Her voice had a directness that left no room for metaphors. Several clerics blinked. You broke a condition. The robed official, what condition? Edda pleaded, tell me which line. The archdeacon made a motion to adjourn. The chronicler did not let him. He set the folio on the table, opened to the marginalia the scribe had slipped him. He tapped the stamped clause with a sharp fingernail. This clause binds passage to a distant patron's ledger, the chronicler. It names a patron who profits when pilgrims never return. Who is this patron? A murmur rose. The road warden's grip on his staff tightened. The chronicler watched their faces for the small changes, the flick of an eye, the tightening of a fist. He let indignation move through his voice now. It did not decorate the moment. It pushed against the inertia inside the room. Archdeacon, he said. The folio carries a recorded signature. Trace it. Show us the chain. He laid out the accusation without rhetorical flourish. He could sense the room resisting. The clerics wanted the problem to remain abstract. The archdeacon's reply came slow. We will not air dirty ledgers in the house. He looked at the road warden. This is a matter of order. The right stands, a junior cleric, pale and sweating, interrupted. If the ledger names a patron, we could be in conspiracy with a lay house. It would scandalize the chapter. He swallowed. Perhaps the right predates us and lacks oversight. His eyes were quick with panic. The road warden barked. You spread suspicion without hunger for truth. You weaken faith. He stepped toward the table and the chronicler braced his shoulder against the movement. Words became knife edges. The chronicler did not yield. I have a folio, he said. I will trace the signature. If the patron exists, the chapter must answer. Let the council send a deputation to the registry immediately. The archdeacon, feeling the momentum shift, signaled guards at the door. The chronicler felt his heartbeat sharpen, a concrete tightening in his chest that pulled his breathing into short, efficient drafts. He had moved from suspicion to insistence to a narrow clarity. He would force the institution to expose itself. 3 clerics left at once to fetch the registry. The robed official followed and Edda was led, hands still raw, to the cloister walkway. The chronicler slipped after them, folio pressed to his ribs, and watched Edda speak once more in the courtyard to no one in particular. They will not let me cross the gate, she said, voice small but steady. The road has rules. I never signed such a ledger. Her eyes searched the chronicler's face as if asking for an ally. He answered without promise, I will not let this stand unexamined. He used measured cadence. His mannerisms, the tapping of index and middle finger when thinking, the careful breath, showed the resolve rather than naming it. At the ferry landing a ferryman waited with his pole. The river smelled of peat and iron. The ferryman's hut sat low, reed, thatched and half in shadow. The ferryman looked older than his hair suggested. His hands were thick and quick. When the chronicler approached, the ferryman did not ask for coin. He slid a page across the wooden bench with a motion so casual it hid intention. You should not have that, the chronicler. But he had already seen the scraped registry page. Numbers erased, a marginal stamp resembling the sigil, and at the edge a single name, an urban house in a city 3 days' ride away, named as beneficiary. The ferryman shrugged and turned toward the river. Not my business if a man pays to keep a road busy. But you look like you keep ledgers, sir. Keep it safe. He scratched at a blemish on his forearm and pushed off. The chronicler felt the world tilt with the new fact. A patron profited when pilgrims did not return. A new wave of anger rose. The chronicler's hands clenched on the folio. Anger moved him from investigation to action. He marched across the ferry ramp at a speed that left several pilgrims staring. He reached the archdeacon beneath the carved relief and put the scraped registry page down so it lay square on the stone. The relief was of a saint with an open hand. The chronicler did not look at the saint. He looked at the archdeacon's face and the way his mouth had thinned. Answer me now, the chronicler, who gains when a pilgrim never returns. He did not ask for a theological argument. He wanted a name. The archdeacon's voice dropped low. Our chapter has always upheld charity. If patrons support the roads, it is for the common good. His fingers trembled on the rim of the registry page. The chronicler read that trimmer like a ledger entry. The road warden lunged for the page. "You will not defame the order with stolen papers," he shouted. He moved with a single violent "ah." The chronicler, prepared, sidestepped and grabbed the page back. "Give it here." The road warden snarled, "Name the patron." "The chronicler." The archdeacon barked. Enough, he had the habit of a man who believed public spectacle could extinguish doubt. He raised a hand and began to intone a formal invocation, a ritual phrase learned in seminary, words measured and hollow. The robed official reached under his robe and produced a small censer. The chronicler felt the room narrow into a series of actions. The road warden's grip, the archdeacon's incantation, the robed official's slow swinging of the censer. He saw movement in the clerics, some appalled, some dutiful. The archdeacon's voice rose and then crackled, "Stop." Edda cried from the doorway. She lunged forward, but guards seized her arms. The chronicler leapt between them and shoved. A guard's hand closed on his collar. Rapid exchange followed. "Let him pass," a junior cleric said. "This is not the way," the road warden countered. "This is order." "We will not be undermined," the archdeacon shouted. "Order now, or we call the chapter." The chronicler answered in shorter, sharper lines. "You cannot call the chapter on evidence. You will not burn a page to silence it." They argued in a string of short lines, voices overlapping, 3 to 6 volleys of accusation and rebuttal snapping like ropes. The chronicler leaned forward, name by name. "Road warden, archdeacon, you are both named in this folio's chain. Where is the patron's ledger entry?" He spoke the names so each man could not avoid them. The road warden swore and lunged. There was a scuffle. Someone knocked over a small oil lamp and it guttered out. The archdeacon barked an order and 2 guards moved to restrain the chronicler. One of the robed official's men produced a small iron implement and pressed it to the chronicler's wrist with enough force that he felt metal bite his skin. Blood found the folio's corner where he had it beneath his fingers. The chronicler did not let go. He set the scraped registry page on the stone surface and shouted, "Ready! Read the name!" He forced the image of the patron into the room. A clerk read aloud, voice shaking, "House of Veralt, beneficiary of perpetual passage. Payments recorded quarterly." The words landed like a physical fact. Heads turned. A silence gave way to a staggered murmur. The road warden's face denied nothing but used anger to cover the admission. The archdeacon paled. "The House of Veralt supports the roads," he said, as if the statement explained away motive. The chronicler repeated, loud and clear, "They profit when pilgrims do not return. This is not charity, it is a contract." Why were these clauses stamped and hidden? His voice did not plead. It demanded action. That was the moment the council fractured. Clerics argued in quick lines. The archdeacon tried to assert clerical primacy. The road warden accused the chronicler of theft. The robed official called for arrest. The clerics who feared scandal suggested a closed inquiry. The chronicler pushed them into motion by producing the folio and naming facts, making the problem concrete. The room broke into factions like a ledger splitting credits and debits. Several clerics rose and left to fetch witnesses. Voices grew sharp. People bumped into one another. The chronicler realized the danger had escalated to a point of no return. Edda's plea returned at the center. She spoke to the assembly with a directness that made people listen. "Do not send me away because a ledger says so. My sister waits. I did not steal coin. I sought shelter for a child." Her voice did not tremble now. It had an economy of feeling that forced the room's attention. 2 guards moved to take her to the outer gate. The chronicler stepped in front of them. Hands clamped on his shoulders. "Let her speak," he said. The robed official's hand reached for the ceremonial sealing kit, cloth stained with previous rites. He moved with the practiced care of a man who had performed ritual many times. The road warden ordered the guards to take Edda. She flailed and struck one of them in desperation. The chronicler lunged toward Edda and grabbed her forearm. "Edda," he said, naming her, "tell them the day you returned late. Tell them why it took a night." He did not ask for sentimental detail. He for specifics. "The fever was high," she said. "A woman in the lane called me. I stayed through dawn to help. I gave her herbs and kept the little girl's head steady. I burned my hand on the brazier. I left a note. I meant to return the next day." Her sentences were short, full of concrete detail. "Where is the note?" The archdeacon demanded. "I left it with the ferryman," she said. "He knows." The chronicler's mind reoriented. The ferryman at the river, he had a scrap of registry earlier. That scrap mattered. At the ferry landing, the ferryman had leaned close and whispered, "They paid Veralt for non-return. They mark a badge and the road wardens enforce the rule." It's business. He had not met the chronicler's eyes. He thumbed the straw of his hut and pushed off the smell of smoke. Hearing the ferryman's name in the chapter house changed the tone of the council. The road warden's face tightened as if he had been struck. The archdeacon tried to deflect with a recitation of canonical texts. The chronicler forced the argument back to evidence. He set the scraped page between the two men and said, "Trace the entries. Sum the payments. See who collected." He used arithmetical language because numbers were harder to deny. The road warden lunged again for the page. This time the robed official moved quicker to seize the chronicler's hand and press the ceremonial sealing against his palm. Heat bit into skin. The chronicler grunted, dropped to one knee, and felt the hot iron press under his hand as if to brand his refusal. They intended to turn his protest into spectacle and thereby quiet the facts. He did not let them make a martyr of himself in that way. He fished one finger into his grimoire and pulled free a note he had prepared. The names of civic officials who would publish such a ledger, the wrote to the registry in the city named on the scraped page. He flung the list into the lap of a junior cleric who had been wavering. "Send someone now," he said. "Send a deputation to Veralt's registry. Bring back the original book. Do not seal this chamber until they return." He made the instruction 3 different ways, each more forceful. Guards hesitated. The archdeacon's lips moved in prayer, not to God but to procedure. A clerk bolted from the room to fetch riders. The road warden spat and stormed out. Night fell slow and damp. They arranged a hurried council beneath the carved relief, and the archdeacon ordered a final ceremony to assert the ordinance publicly, hoping spectacle would drown inquiry. Even as the chronicler watched, the robed official prepared the sealing, oils, heated metal, ritual words. Edda was dragged to the shrine steps. The chronicler tried to pull her free. A guard struck his shoulder and drove him back. He watched as the robed official leaned forward and touched the emblem to Edda's badge. The metal hissed. Smoke curled. "No," the chronicler loud and clear, "this is a theft of free will." He stepped forward and slapped his palm onto the badge as the robed official raised it. The iron burned into his skin. He cried out once and held still. The pain was an instrument that sharpened resolve rather than dissolving it. The archdeacon declared that the rite was fulfilled and that Edda must travel as bound. The robed official turned with a slow, satisfied motion. The chronicler watched Edda's face as guards forced her through the outer gate. The chronicler felt humiliation flare when the archdeacon ordered a token of the road sealed into his coat for interfering with sacred order. They branded him with a small iron sigil pressed into a scrap pinned to his lapel, a mockery of binding. The chronicler held the stolen folio in his fist while the scar on his palm cooled. The guards drove Edda down the outer road under torchlight. The robed official's retinue formed a wedge to force her into the stream of travelers. The chronicler lunged one last time and missed. His palm, still stinging, knocked his satchel open and a loose page flew free into the muddy street. A ferryman, older, hands like paddles, picked it up and bowed his head. He handed the page to the chronicler in a single, unhurried motion and said, "Keep it. Follow them if you must. It's how men learn the truth these days." He pushed his pole and drifted away. Outside the gate, rain had turned the road to a dark mirror. Edda's shape dwindled between travelers until she was only a small figure under a hood. Guards herded her past the river landing and onto the lane that led east. The chronicler clutched the folio and the registry scrap, thumbed the scorch on his palm, and felt a new movement in him. Not grand resolve offered as sentiment, but the concrete plan of pursuit. He knelt on the shrine steps as dawn bled across the pavement. He opened his grimoire to a fresh page, neat lines, headings, and recorded the day's events. Wax seal in the market, the road warden's refusal, the scribe's folio, the registry scrap naming house of Veralt, the archdeacon's invocation, the public sealing, and the burning iron to his palm. He wrote with short, unequivocal sentences. Each line was an action, a name, a date. He wrote the emotion as he experienced it: suspicion at the shrine, indignation in the chapter house, shock when he read the ledger, nausea when they branded Edda, resolve as he tucked the folio away. He did not describe feelings in generalities. He recorded behaviors, tapping fingers, a clenched jaw, a hand that would not let go of paper. The chronicler catalogued each movement because those movements would be his evidence. He closed the folio and wrapped it in oilcloth. He sealed the grimoire with a single ribbon and set it inside his satchel. He rose, adjusted his spectacles, drew the rosary, like bead strand, through his fingers once, and felt the faint smell of waxed parchment and slow, burning incense linger. He did not speak grand promises. He slid the satchel over his shoulder, tested the strap, and walked toward the ferry. An hour later the road was empty but for wet shoe prints and the faint echo of prayers from the cathedral. The badge on his chest still bore a blackened circle where the robed official's iron had kissed leather. He touched it with his fingertips. The skin underneath had blistered and cooled. He did not dwell on the pain. He planned routes, scribbled names of riders, and crossed off inns known to be under Viralt influence. At the ferry the same ferryman nodded once and pushed off. The chronicler paid no coin. He had ledger lines of his own to keep. He stepped onto the waiting boat whose planks smelled of tar and old rope. The current tugged. The river took them when the ferryman let go. As the boat cut through a smear of fog, the chronicler set his grimoire on his knees and opened to the entry he had just made. He made 3 short notations. Call witnesses in the city. Secure testimony from the scribe. Record the ferryman's statement. He underlined each with a single iron stroke. He had shifted from suspicion into action and found in the work of tracing names and pages a kind of exhausted certainty. The plan was not a vow to change his life. It was a ledger of tasks. He would follow Edda because the folio demanded tracing. He would confront the House of Viralt because the registry named them. He would expose the covenant because numbers and names could not be washed with ritual. The day lightened as the ferry reached the far bank. The chronicler disembarked, pulled the hood of his worn scholar's coat up against the drizzle, and set his feet in the direction the registry pointed. He had no illusions about the danger. The roadwarden's reach was long. The House of Viralt was wealthy. The archdeacon could marshal ecclesiastical cover. He understood stakes through the ledger. He felt indignation in the set of his shoulders. He felt shock in the memory of the ceiling and the brand on his palm. He felt resolve in the meticulous notes he had made. A rider arrived from the city with a dispatch that afternoon. The clerk who delivered it name. Marceau had read the entry at the registry and confirmed ledger entries linking local inns to payments from Viralt. The rider gave his words in short lines. They credit innkeepers when pilgrims stay past their return date. Marceau, they list sums. They call it welfare for the road. But the sums grow when pilgrims remain absent. The chronicler folded the dispatch and tucked it into his grimoire. He kept his breathing even. Marceau, named the clerks who signed the ledger. The rider named 2, Summonet and Gaultier. I will find them. I will get sworn statements. The chronicler stated these steps as entries in accounts. By dusk the chronicler had a map of routes, names, and witness locations. He had not solved everything. He still needed the original ledger and a public reckoning to force the archdeacon and the road warden into admissions. But he had built a chain of evidence that could be followed. He thought of Edda walking the eastern road under torchlight, of her blistered hands and the way she had spoken of a fevered child. He thought of the ferryman handing him a scraped page as if passing a key. He felt in his throat a compact of duty rather than an abstract sentiment, an obligation recorded in ink. The night before he left the town he sat on the steps of the deserted cathedral and wrote one final line in his grimoire. Follow the ledger to Viralt. Expose patronage. Free returned to the road. He closed the book, snapped the clasp, and pushed the satchel strap across his shoulder. When dawn touched the road with a thin wash of pale light, the chronicler stepped out past the gate. Guards watched him but made no move to stop a man leaving with a satchel and a burned palm. He did not look back at the cathedral. He set his face toward the lane where Edda had been taken, toward the city named in the scraped registry page, and toward the House of Viralt. He walked with measured steps. The badge at his chest felt heavy. The scorch on his palm throbbed as a reminder. He took one last note. If he failed, he would at least leave an account that others might read. He walked under a sky that held steady rain and a thin light, and with each measured footfall he moved from the chronicling of events into the making of evidence. He had the folio, the registry scrap, the ferryman's word, the rider's dispatch, and a litany of names. He had the arch of a story narrowed to facts, and he had the concrete plan of pursuit. He stepped onto the road and followed the scorched badge,